Perhaps one of the most fun and difficult challenges for any dungeon master is world building. Now, there's plenty of pre-made worlds out there that we can just go and play in, but some dungeon masters want to create something of their own, and why not? It's fun. I can personally spend just hours world building, creating locations and cities, dangerous places for my party to go, the gods of the world, all this different cool stuff. But it can be a difficult balance of what's the right amount of information? What do I put in? The whole idea of world building could be overwhelming to some DMs. So today I'm going to show you a couple books from Kobold Press that are designed to help you build your worlds. Let's get into it. Hello everybody, I'm Joe and this is the DM Toolbox, your go-to place to get all the tools you need to enhance your D&D games. Let's talk about this world building. So what is world building? Well, that can mean different things to a lot of people. Depending on what your goals are and what you're building your world for, you may have different methods you can go about to world building. And there's a lot of intricacies to building a world for your games or maybe for a book you want to write. But how do we go about this? What's the right things to do? What are the wrong things to do? What's too much information? What's too little information? Where do we even start? Especially if you're a newer DM, it can be hard to find a place to start. So Kobold Press has a couple of books. These are the Kobold Guide to World Building, and they're volume 2 as well. Now the volume 2 is more recent edition, but these books really do go together. And Kobold Press has actually put out a lot of these guide books. There's one for magic and one for monster building, one for designing board games. They have a whole bunch of them, and I hope to cover more of them in the future. But I wanted to go over the world building today because I feel like it is something that a lot of dungeon masters want to do and maybe struggle with or don't know where to begin. These books are basically a series of essays by different authors, and you'll probably recognize a lot of these names. So we have obviously Wolfgang Baur, the creator of Kobold Press. We have Monty Cook, who's a very big name in the industry, one of my favorite world creators. We've got Jeff Grubb. We've got Keith Baker. We've got Steve Winter. So there's several people in this book, or in these books, that have written these great essays. And I just want to touch on a couple of them in here. But to give you a quick rundown of what's in this first one, we have the introduction, so fostering worlds to hide and seek in. Then we have what is setting design, different kinds of world building inside out and outside in. How real is your world on history and setting? Bringing history to life. And more of let's say, apocalypso, gaming after the fall. Here Be Dragons on map making. Now that's a fun one that I definitely want to touch on because that's written by Jonathan Roberts, who's one of my favorite fantasy cartographers. He actually did the Game of Thrones maps. There's how to design a city, state, tribe, or nation. That's a big one, right? Are you going to have, obviously when we talk about city design, there's some great books like the one from Nord for, creating cities and stuff like that. But when we start building kingdoms and nations, there's more that goes to that, and that's a great article in there. So there's a lot of stuff in here. We have designing a pantheon, designing guilds, how to write a world Bible, playing in someone else's backyard, the limits of design. So a lot of interesting articles. So let's just take a quick look at one that I find maybe one of the most compelling in here, written by Monty Cook, called Different Kinds of World Building. So what he brings up in here is a very good point. There's different types for different types of people. If you are a novelist, right? If you are writing Game of Thrones, you're not writing an RPG game, you're writing books. So designing the world for that is a lot different than, let's say, designing, what Matt Mercer did with Exandria, right? Building a world where he's going to give it to us players and we're going to go out and decide what we're going to do with it. So it has to be a little more complete. However, there's a third type, which is maybe what you're going to do, which is designing a world just for you and your players. And that is a different type of approach we can take altogether. So, he talks in here about, the players and about the GM. So as the GM, you want to kind of create some key points and things like that. But you also want to loop your players in on this, right? So when I did a world build recently, or I should say a couple of years ago anyways, I said, okay, here's my world. This is kind of what it's about. This is kind of what makes it unique. And that's what I had. And, I started off in a city, and that's kind of where I did most of my building around, was this first area. And I had some history on like this ancient undead war that played a big part in my story arc for my campaign. Then my players came in and said, well, I want to be a druid, and I want to be part of this guild. And I'm like, okay, what's the guild about? And I just started asking him questions, and he told me about the guild. I'm like, great, that's a guild in this world now. And what's their symbol? And he designed a logo for that guild. And then there was a cleric, and what god do you worship? And she came up with the name of the god. So letting your players design aspects of your world is super useful. I mean, it's sourcing it, right? You're outsourcing it to these players, and they may have some great ideas, and you can incorporate it into your world. The guy that was playing the druid was a dwarven druid, and he decided he wanted to play that druid with more of like an Eastern European accent, like a kind of a heavy Russian accent. And I decided, okay, so all the dwarves in my world are going to sound like that now. And that's what we did. I kind of almost designed the dwarves to be more of a like social communist type of society, and kind of took notes from the Soviet Union to kind of make what I wanted the Dwarven Kingdom to be, all based off of a player's idea. So use your players, right? So a lot of good tips in here. And again, like a lot of these essays are a few pages, some of them 2-3 pages, some of them are 10-15 pages, but they all have some really great information and insight into how to build your world. Okay, let's talk about volume 2. Now, volume 2 is really no different than volume 1. It's just a continuation, more articles, more essays on these topics. And there's one I kind of want to talk about because it expands on the one we were just talking about with the different types of world building. And this one here is called Spiral Campaign Development. Now, this is by Michael Shea, which you know as the Lazy DM. He puts out great stuff. Check out his stuff. In fact, I backed his recent Kickstarter, and those books, when they arrive, I'll be doing a video on those. But let's take a look at that. So Spiral Campaign Development, what is that? And this is a little bit kind of what I just talked about, what I did. This is, I think, is one of the better methods. If you want to build a world for your players, how do you go about that without, you don't need to go macro, right? We don't need to go and design everything from the creation history to the entire, God pantheon, to every kingdom and city and location and their histories and their people. We don't need all of that. What we need is a starting location. So I created a city, and then you create some key points of interest around that city and things that the players can do there. So maybe create 3 to 5 locations with some different stuff going on, and then look at your players and maybe tie some of their stories in. And here he talks about maybe the veteran fighter of the party knows a shop owner who used to be his sergeant, or the rogue has to pay dues to a thieves guild in order to operate in that city or something like that, right? Tie them in. But he does talk about, taking as far as your world, right? We have to say, okay, why am I creating a world in the first place? Why don't I just play in the Forgotten Realms? Or why don't I just play in Dragonlance? Or why don't I just play in Exandria? Well, I need to set my world apart. So what are 3 key things about your world? Maybe 6, up to 6, but 3 to 6, we'll say, key things about your world. Here's a few examples here. And what you do during session 0 is you talk to your players about that and say, here are things that are kind of common knowledge. Example he gives here is these giant these giant spires who shot out of the ground, and that there's this guy that sits on the throne of a fallen kingdom, or whatever it is, right? There's these, few things that are like, okay, here's things everybody knows about this world, and that are kind of key factors that set it apart. So you start there, you add in your city, You create unique aspects of that city. What are unique aspects of the city? Maybe there's an old citadel that no one approaches or goes to, but just the city is built in the shadow of that. Maybe create a little history on that. And then you tie your player information in. And you start to build out. So here's the 5 locations of points of interest, places where they can go adventure. I have people that might approach them about going to those places or events that will lead them to those places. And once they're done with that, they're going to want to branch out. Maybe I come up with the next biggest city, a port city that they can go to and set off to another part of the world. And you start here in the center at your first starting area, and you start to build out. And you kind of do these concentric circles, and you build out, you build out, you build out, and eventually over time you've created a world. And keep notes on this, keep a binder, or use an online tool. But you will over time develop a world. Some of that may evolve from your interactions with your players and the things they do. Some stuff you might just have to make up on the spot, but you're like, hey, that was a good idea. So that's what spiral world building is. And I think it's one of the most effective, methods of world building, and what I would definitely recommend to most people that are at least building for their own personal games. Aside from that, this book does have some other really cool stuff. Things like break the world to make the world, right? Remember that if you're a Critical Role fan, I know not all of you are, but Matt Mercer had his city, and the players would hang out there, and then one day these dragons just attacked and just destroyed the city. I mean, they just ravaged the whole world, and their whole thing was to basically go and defeat these dragons and save the world. Sometimes breaking it remakes it, and it can be a lot of fun. So some really great things in both of these books that if you are looking to start world building or looking for better ways to world build or just looking for some ideas, I'd highly recommend picking up these books from Kobold Press. I think they're some of the best guide books that they have out there, and definitely some of the most useful ones that I like to read often and go back and reference quite a bit. So check these out. I'll put a link in the description to where you can pick these up. And go grab them, check them out. Awesome books. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like what I'm doing here, and I'll keep bringing you more content and maybe some more giveaways in the near future. So that's it for now. And until next time, roll those dice.